The sky above Draxor 4 was stained with fire. Ash drifted down like snow, settling on the metal bones of broken warships from a dozen different species. This was the Wreckfield, a place where empires died and silence reigned, until the last week, when it had turned into a contested zone between Terran Federation scouts and the Draxorian war clans. Captain Eric Torvald adjusted the collar of his jacket, sweat rolling down the side of his face as he studied the charred hull of an old cruiser half buried in rust and alien moss. The graveyard stretched for miles. The radiation was low now, but the danger wasn't. His mission was simple: retrieve data from a lost probe somewhere in the field and get out alive. What complicated things was the other team also combing this wasteland? Draxorians. And not just any Draxorians. "Captain?" whispered Private Lena from behind a shattered engine coil. "We've got movement. North Ridge. Big." Eric raised a hand and peered through his visor's scope. His breath caught. Draxorian warriors were notoriously brutal and tall, but the figure striding down the ridge like a god carved from stone outshone them all. A woman, broad-shouldered and midnight blue-skinned, her armor made from the jaws of extinct beasts and plates of scorched metal. Her silver dreadlocks shimmered under the twin suns. Strapped to her back was a greatsword that looked like it could cleave a dropship in half. She paused at the ridge's crest, hands on hips, surveying the Terran scouts below like an apex predator spotting a pack of uncertain prey. Eric lowered the scope. "I know that face," he muttered. "Zara Vex." Lena blinked. "The Queen Blood Bladeborn?" "Yep, Zara Vex. Commander of the Broken Maw tribe, slayer of 8 warlords, supposedly the only living warrior to wear dragon hide forged under live lightning. And according to every debrief file back at command, she hated humans." Her voice cut through the distance like a vibrohorn. "Is that a Terran male I see scuttling around my ancestors' bones?" Eric didn't flinch. He stepped out into view and called back. "Just taking a walk. Beautiful day for mutual planetary violation, don't you think?" The warriors flanking her chuckled lowly. Zara descended slowly, purposefully, stopping 20 feet from him. Her eyes flicked across his chest, arms, and then lower, lingering on the side holster barely visible beneath his waist-length coat. "You carry that thing like it matters," she said, gesturing lazily. "Your little human weapon? What is it? A sidearm? Knife? Or some Terran attempt at intimidation?" "Something like that." Zara snorted. "You lot always carry your weapons like secrets, as if size alone might impress the galaxy. Tell me, soldier, is it even worth pulling out, or will I laugh the moment you expose it?" The Draxorians behind her howled with laughter, slapping armor and hissing through fanged grins. Eric didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just looked her in the eye, slowly reached under his coat, and unlatched the magnetic holster that held the tool she'd mocked. Zara crossed her arms in bored amusement, waiting for a pistol. Maybe a collapsible blade. Instead, Eric withdrew a weapon that made her expression go still. It was nearly as long as his leg when fully extended, metallic with layered blue alloys, humming with low-frequency power. It shimmered with kinetic energy, the interior lined with shifting tech runes that adapted to combat response. The tip opened into a 4-point arc, glowing with plasma along its edges. He held it like it was part of his arm. Zara's eyes narrowed. The grin faded. "That's not Terran standard." "No," Eric replied. "It's custom. And it's enormous." "Thank you," he said flatly. Her warriors didn't laugh this time. Because suddenly, none of them were sure if the joke had just turned into a challenge. Zara Vex paced slowly in a half-circle around him, eyeing the weapon in his hand like a predator studying an unfamiliar rival. The wind kicked up clouds of dust between them, brushing Eric's coat against his legs and rattling the shattered remains of starfighter wings nearby. The Wreckfield was quiet again, save for the whispering tension building like pressure behind a dam. "Show me," she said finally. Eric raised an eyebrow. "Show you?" She pointed her chin toward the weapon. "How it moves. What it does. Unless you brought it for decoration, Terran." He gave the faintest nod, and with a flick of his wrist, the weapon shifted. The arc split into twin ends. It spun on its axis, forming a double-headed glaive. Then he pressed his thumb into the grip, and it telescoped outward into a staff blade, humming with energy. He swept it behind his back, around in front, into a defensive crescent, and stabbed downward into the ground. The earth sizzled where it touched. Even Zara flinched, slightly. "That's not bad," she muttered. "Where'd you steal it from?" "I built it." "Liar." "Suit yourself." For a moment, no one spoke. Then she did something Eric didn't expect. She unstrapped her sword. The air changed. It was heavier now. She planted the blade in the ground and stepped toward him. No weapon, just hands raised. A weapon can be large, Terran, but it's useless without a soul to guide it. So let's see. Do you actually know how to fight with that thing? Or are you just swinging compensations? Eric slid the staff back onto his back, his stance lowering. "Are you seriously asking to spar?" "I'm offering you a lesson," she replied, "in humility. And I'm giving you a warning," he said, narrowing his eyes. "You won't like what happens if I win." She laughed again, this time lower, darker. "Then try, little human. Prove to me your size isn't wasted." They circled each other. The Drixorian warriors moved back, clearing space among the wreckage. And in the middle of a battlefield filled with the bones of 1,000 ships and fallen soldiers, a human and an alien war queen prepared to test each other, not with armies or politics, but with skill, strength, and perhaps something neither of them had expected to find in the other. Curiosity. Respect. Maybe even, if the dust settled right, something like admiration. But first, they'd have to try to break each other. The first strike came faster than a blink. Zara Vex launched toward him, with such explosive force that her armor split the air in a shriek, both feet leaving the ground as her body twisted mid-leap. Her fists weren't wild, they were disciplined chaos, each movement calculated through years of war and battlefield instinct. Eric ducked the incoming elbow, spun beneath her arc, and extended his staff into a wide crescent, catching her back foot as she landed. She stumbled, not from imbalance, but surprise. Her grin sharpened. They both lunged. Eric brought the weapon up in a sweeping vertical slice, switching the arc blades to pulse mode. The plasma edge caught her shoulder, but her reactive plating dispersed the energy with a hiss. She rolled with it, dropped low, and drove a punch toward his knee. He barely jumped in time, using the weight of his weapon to lift himself off the ground. His boot met her forearm in midair, and they separated again, skidding back into defensive positions. The Drixorian warriors surrounding them remained utterly still. Their laughter from earlier now turned into tense fascination. This was no petty sparring match. It was a collision of two worlds, both warriors walking the razored line between display and dominance. Zara lunged again, this time with a spinning back kick that cracked against Eric's chest plate. He absorbed it, let the kinetic padding distribute the impact, and twisted his weapon into a spear configuration. She tried to duck under, but he faked the strike, reversed his grip, and brought the butt of the staff up hard beneath her chin. Her head snapped back slightly, and for the first time she took a full step away from him. "You fight like someone who's never lost," she said, rubbing her jaw. "I've lost plenty," Eric replied, panting. "I just learned faster than the others." She lunged again, less anger now, more focus. The dance changed. No longer a contest to humiliate. Now it was a test. Their weapons were extensions of their convictions, and every clash sent vibrations echoing across the ruined steel bones of the Wreckfield. At one point, Eric slid beneath a fallen engine core. Zara leapt atop it, using its rusted edge to launch herself down like a falling blade. He blocked her with both arms, their faces inches apart. "I've never fought a human like you," she said through gritted teeth. "You've never fought me," he replied. Then he shoved her off and pivoted his staff, sweeping low, knocking her legs out from under her. She fell hard, but she laughed as she hit the ground, a laugh not of mockery, but respect. He offered his hand. She took it. And for a moment, the battlefield breathed with them. Neither had won. Neither had lost. But something between them had shifted irreversibly. The sun dipped beneath the fractured horizon, casting long orange shadows across the broken hulls of ancient warships. The air had cooled slightly, the wind tracing paths across the jungle's edge and stirring the smoke curling from the distant battle remnants. Zara stood with her hands on her hips, armor scorched, a shallow cut across her cheek still seeping violet blood. She hadn't cleaned it. She wore it with pride. Eric sat against the base of a shattered scout ship, nursing a bruised rib and sipping from a flask of electrolyte gel that tasted like burnt copper and sadness. He didn't complain. His weapon lay across his knees, deactivated now, but still warm with the memory of impact. Zara approached him without a word and crouched across from him. You surprised me, Taryn. You weren't exactly predictable yourself. She nodded, the smirk returning. You swing that weapon like it weighs nothing. It nearly does. Composite spine, motion reactive stabilizers. It's huge, she said again, tilting her head. No human I've met carries something like that. He chuckled, then winced as the movement pulled at his side. Most don't survive carrying something like that. Zara didn't laugh this time. She studied him. Where did you learn to fight like that? Earth, then Mars, then I stopped counting. Why here? Because they sent me. That's not an answer. Eric looked up, his eyes catching the last light of day. Because there's always someone who thinks humans are small, weak, primitive, and someone has to remind them that we only seem small because they never look closely enough. She didn't reply for a long time. Then softly, You're not weak. Neither are you. Another silence passed between them, not cold, not heavy, just still. She stood. There's a treaty negotiation happening in 3 days. Your diplomats are sending someone I can't stand. Would you prefer someone you already tried to beat to death? She turned over her shoulder. No. I prefer someone who's proven they can handle me. He raised an eyebrow. Are you inviting me to a peace summit? I'm inviting you to stand beside me when we tell our sides of the story, she said. Because your story deserves to be heard. Even by people who think humans are weak, especially by them. She began to walk away, then paused. Eric, she said without turning. When you drew that weapon, I thought it was just some oversized showpiece. Now I know it was something else. What? Proof that we have no idea what humans are capable of. And then she was gone, vanishing into the mist as if the jungle itself had swallowed her whole. Eric sat back, his body aching, his blood warm, and his thoughts restless. He had come to Draxor 4 expecting a simple mission. But what he found was a warrior, a challenge, and a glimpse of something stranger than fear. Respect. Real, raw, and earned the hard way. And somewhere beneath it all, he felt the early stirrings of something even more dangerous. Curiosity. 2 days passed like the turning of a page, and Eric could not forget the way Zara Vex had looked at him before she vanished into the Wreckfield mists. Not the disdain from before their duel, but something far rarer. Acknowledgement. It haunted him more than the bruises. He'd fought wars, survived assassins, and bled in no fewer than 3 gravity wells. But something about that moment, that look, made him restless. The morning of the treaty summit arrived with the approach of black thunderclouds gathering above the high mesa of Kamareth, where the meeting would be held. The structure itself was built from the remains of a crashed Draxorian war barge, its curved ribs forming a coliseum open to the sky. Ancient vines hung like drapery between bones of metal. Warriors, ambassadors, diplomats, and mercenary guards lined the perimeter. Eric stood at the far end of the arena beside the Earth Federation's diplomatic corps, his armor clean, his weapons sealed in stasis. He hated these things. The words were always double-edged, spoken with smiles and carried behind blades. But when Zara appeared at the top of the steps, every thought vanished from his mind. She was different. Still armored, still fierce, but now draped in a mantle of silver-blue thread etched with markings of peace. Her sword remained across her back, not because she was ready to fight, but because even in peace, her people believed that respect must walk with strength. The delegates began their posturing. There were speeches, arguments, false promises layered like poison under honey. Eric barely listened. His focus never left Zara, who, despite being a guest at the table, did not speak. She watched, studied, waited, until the Solon representative, one of the more vocal detractors of Terran involvement, stood up and pointed at Eric. Why is a weapon-bearer seated so near the negotiating line? The Terran came to intimidate, not to unify. The hall murmured. Zara's voice cut through like a thrown blade. He sits because I asked him to. The Solon laughed. A pet then? No, she said, rising slowly, her voice dangerously calm. A storm. The chamber stilled. Zara walked to the center and turned to the assembly. 3 days ago, this man stood alone against my blades and survived. He didn't yield. He didn't beg. He fought me to a standstill. He earned my respect, not because of his species, but because of his will. I invited him here because peace is not forged by cowardice. It is forged by fire. She turned to Eric. In a world of monsters and warriors, he is both. Eric rose, but said nothing. The moment didn't belong to him. It belonged to the woman who had mocked him, tested him, bled beside him, and now defended him before the leaders of their stars. Later, after the summit had quieted and the signatures were laid in code upon the treaty's quantum scroll, Zara found him alone beneath one of the metal archways, staring out at the thunderclouds. "You didn't speak," she said. "You already did," he replied. She nodded, and they listened. They listened because they feared your blade. "No," she said. They listened because for once, someone showed them what a human can be when he stops pretending to be small. He looked at her, brow furrowed. "You're not what I expected," she grinned. "Neither are you." They stood beneath the storm's edge as the first drops of rain struck the metal of the old war barge. And they didn't move. The next morning, Zara returned unannounced to the temporary Terran camp just outside the summit site. Her arrival sent ripples through the soldiers stationed there, many of whom still considered her a walking threat despite the treaty. But Eric met her at the gates, and no one dared challenge her presence. She didn't wear her peace mantle this time. She wore her true armor, weathered and grim. Her sword was visible, but untouched. She carried something else, wrapped in a cloth of burnt copper. "A gift?" Eric asked as she stepped into his quarters. "A challenge," she replied, placing it on his table. He unwrapped it slowly. It was a blade, short, single-edged, forged in Draxorian style but sized for a human hand. It was impossibly dense for its size and shimmered with flickers of starlight across the edge. "I had it made last night," she said, "from the metal of a fallen warchief's helm." Eric turned the blade in his hand. "Why?" "Because there is one final rite," she said. "Not a duel, not a show, a test. The path of proving. You walk it with one weapon. You pass it, you're no longer an outsider. You become something else. And if I fail?" "You won't." He looked up. "You sound certain." "I fought you," she said. "I saw the fire in you. I mocked your weapon because I didn't believe anything that size could be dangerous. I was wrong, and if your blade was only half the story, I want to see the rest." Eric didn't answer for a long time. He just stared at the dagger, feeling its weight in his palm, the history pressed into its edge. Then, finally, he looked at her and nodded. "Then let's walk." The path of proving was not a trail. It was a gauntlet carved through the jagged crests of the obsidian spires, an ancient course of fire, pain, silence, and vision. It stripped a warrior down to bone and belief, forcing them to meet themselves at the edge of who they thought they were. Zara walked behind him as he took his first step into the chasm. No cheering crowd, no trumpets, just him, the dagger, the shadows, and the alien warrior who now believed in the man she had once laughed at. And as he disappeared into the dark, her voice followed him, soft and powerful. "Show them, Terran. Show them how huge you truly are." The obsidian spires rose like jagged knives into the atmosphere, a maze of impossible geometry born from volcanic upheaval and scorched winds. This was no ceremonial path. It was a crucible, older than the Draxorian clans, predating even their bloodlines. Every warrior who walked the path of proving did so alone. And not all returned. Eric stood at its entrance beneath a slate-gray sky. The wind whistled through black stone channels, carrying the whispers of those who had failed within. The only thing he carried was the dagger Zara had given him, short, ugly, ancient, and a sheath of water tablets woven into his collar. His staff, his armor, his communicator, everything else had been left behind. "You will be tested," Zara had told him the night before, her voice quieter than usual. "Not by monsters, but by your own reflection. The spires don't care about species. They strip you down to what you are when no one is watching." He hadn't answered then. There was nothing to say. Now at the edge of stone and shadow, he took his first step in. The world changed instantly. Light dimmed, the air thickened. The jagged walls closed in around him, forming corridors that twisted without logic, like the bones of the planet had been broken and reassembled by a mad god. His boots scraped across obsidian dust as he pressed forward, silent save for the distant echo of dripping water and the whisper of wind that didn't seem natural. Then came the first vision. It wasn't a hallucination. It was memory, resurrected in perfect clarity. He stood once again on the battlefield of Arxon III, where he had lost his squad to an ambush. The bodies were where he remembered them. Juno, with her chest blown open. Diaz, who died shielding two civilians. Eric had survived only because he'd run out of ammo and hid behind wreckage. He remembered the shame, the silence. Now he saw himself again, kneeling there, helmet cracked, whispering apologies to the dead. "Coward," a voice said behind him. He turned. The voice belonged to himself. Another Eric, taller, sharper, eyes filled with judgment. "You survived by hiding," it sneered. "You wear medals for what? Being lucky?" Eric stepped forward. "No." The doppelganger circled him. "You think this alien world sees you as strong? They saw you bleed, and now they make you dance. Your size means nothing. Your weapon is a joke. Your honor? Stolen." Eric gritted his teeth and closed his eyes. He remembered Zara's voice. "The spires don't test your body. They test the voice you pretend isn't there." He opened his eyes. "I'm not perfect," he said aloud. "But I didn't survive because I ran. I survived so someone could still remember the ones who died." The shadow dissolved into smoke, and the spires let him pass. He staggered onward. The path narrowed into a crack between two towering walls. The heat increased. He crawled on hands and knees through tunnels lined with ancient glyphs, Draxorian symbols for suffering, unyielding truth. Time lost meaning. Hunger gnawed at him. Thirst clawed at his throat. He saw more visions. His family, the child he lost before deployment, a battlefield where he'd killed a begging enemy and pretended it was necessary. All of it came. And he did not turn away. He faced each memory, blade in hand, even though none of them required steel, only honesty. When he emerged from the spires 3 days later, staggering and sunburnt, skin cracked from dehydration and eyes hollowed by what he'd seen, Zara was waiting. She didn't speak at first. He fell to his knees before her, gripping the dagger tight in both hands. Then she stepped forward, knelt, and placed her hand on his chest. "Now," she said softly, "you belong here." Eric collapsed into the dust, but not from weakness. He had finally put the weight of his past down. And she was still there. The skies above Lightfall were clear again, as if the world itself had been waiting for Eric's return. Word of his survival spread through Draxorian channels like a sacred wind, and though few spoke openly of the trials he endured, all who saw him afterward looked at him differently. No longer as an outsider, no longer as just another soldier. He was now blood-proven, and that changed everything. He returned not to his camp, but to Zara's keep, a high-towered fortress carved from the cliffs above the Salt Vein River. The halls were narrow and tall, lit with amber fire and the soft pulse of memory crystals that glowed when warriors returned from battle. He walked them alone, the dagger still strapped to his belt, the same weapon he had held through 3 days of madness and memory. Zara waited for him on the rooftop terrace beneath the open stars. She had discarded her armor and wore a robe of black and cobalt, her dreadlocks braided tightly, her eyes calm but unreadable. Behind her, the stars blazed across the sky like scattered embers. "You came back," she said, though she had never doubted it. "I wasn't sure I would." "But you did," she said, "and you're changed." He nodded slowly. "You knew I would be." "That's why I gave you the blade," she said, "not because of its edge, but because of what it would show you." He stepped closer, feeling the space between them hum with something unsaid. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Why trust a human? Why give me that weapon?" Zara met his gaze. "Because when I mocked your weapon that first day, it wasn't because it was small. It was because I didn't understand its power. You carried it like it was nothing. But when you revealed it, when you used it, it changed the rhythm of the fight, of my thinking. And you didn't use it to dominate. You used it to survive, to protect." She stepped forward now, closing the space. "And I realized that sometimes the weapons that look the strangest hold the most meaning. And sometimes the warriors who say the least carry the most fire." He lowered his eyes briefly, then looked up again. "I came here to prove I wasn't a joke. And instead," she said, touching the dagger at his waist, "you proved something much harder." "What's that?" "You proved your loyalty." She reached for his hand and placed it over the dagger hilt. "And now, Eric Torvald of Earth, this weapon is not just something you carry. It is your name, your right, your answer." His fingers tightened on the hilt. "What do I do with it?" She smiled then, the kind of smile forged from respect, affection, and perhaps something that went deeper than either of them were ready to say aloud. "You do what no one expects," she whispered. "You hold it high, and let them see how huge it truly is." And as they stood together on the edge of her world, beneath a sky they now shared, the blade between them became more than a weapon. It became a symbol of what they were becoming, together. The alliance between Earth and Draxor had barely begun to breathe when the skies above both worlds shuddered. Unidentified vessels breached the outer beacons of the Draxorian planetary ring, silent, fast, and shielded from early scans. Eric stood on the command deck of the warbarge Kor's Talon, flanked by Zara and her second-in-command, Garin, when the alert sounded. The enemy ships weren't Solon or rogue pirates. They were something else, something new. Zara's jaw was tight, her fingers gripping the rail as the projected tactical map filled with red. "They're not here to talk," Garin grunted. "They targeted our orbital sanctuaries first, civilian stations." Eric narrowed his eyes. "Then they're here to make a statement, one soaked in blood." "They think we're vulnerable," Zara said. "Freshly allied, politically unstable, divided by species." "We're not," Eric answered. Zara looked at him then. "Not anymore." She turned to her crew. "Raise the fleet, activate the outer sentries. All wings prepare to engage." She glanced at Eric once more. "And you. I want you at my side." He didn't hesitate. "Where else would I be?" Within the hour, they launched into the atmosphere. Dozens of Draxorian warships lifted like mythic beasts, engines howling, hulls glowing with tribal insignias and pulsing engine cores. Among them flew a single Terran strike cruiser, barely a fraction the size of the Draxorian behemoths, but carrying a name now spoken with reverence across both fleets, the Calder Line. Eric stood on the forward deck in light armor, his blade, Zara's dagger, secured against his chest, and his Terran hybrid staff newly mounted to his back. Beside him, Zara moved like fire in motion, armor redrawn in ceremonial patterns that signified her acceptance of the Terran as part of her blood clan. They didn't need to speak as they docked onto the lead assault bridge of the enemy flagship. Their eyes locked once, and with a silent nod, they breached the corridor with their strike team. What followed was chaos. Hallways of white steel and black flame. An alien species never before catalogued, tall, slick-skinned with neural weapons woven into their bones and a language that came in shrieking pulses. They fought like lightning, but Eric and Zara moved like storm and anchor. He wielded his staff like a living extension of thought, shifting between shield and blade in perfect rhythm. She, with her jagged sword and battle cries that cracked the walls, carved a path through their ranks. Together, they moved not like allies, but like halves of something indivisible. Then the command chamber fell open. Inside was the architect. Twice Zara's height, cloaked in synthetic robes, its face was a shifting mask of mirrored fragments. It watched them without fear. "You are fragments of dying civilizations," it hissed through a synthetic voice box. "This alliance you forged is a whisper. We are the storm that consumes whispers." Zara didn't flinch. "Then I will show you the roar of one." Eric stepped forward. "You threatened children, you bombed shrines, you declared war on a world you didn't understand." The architect moved to strike, but Eric was already in motion. He didn't reach for his staff. He drew the dagger. Zara's dagger. The one forged in the silence of loss and lit by fire beneath the stars. The blade cut through the architect's defenses like truth through deception, striking the core beneath its armor. The machine fell, hissing, twitching, and when the chamber dimmed, Eric stood with the dagger still glowing, Zara's hand gripping his shoulder as the final flames died around them. She didn't say anything, she didn't have to, because what stood between them now was not just victory, it was trust forged in blood. Weeks later, the Wreckfield was silent again, not with death, but with reflection. A monument had been built in the center of the field. Not of stone or steel, but of memory crystals, woven with both Terran and Draxorian runes. It shimmered in the sun, casting the names of the fallen across the grass. At the center was a single word, engraved in both tongues: unity. Zara stood before it in full ceremonial robes. Her sword was sheathed across her back, but today it was only symbol. Today she was not Zara the warrior, but Zara of two worlds, Queen Blade of Draxor and bearer of a treaty that had survived fire. Eric stood beside her, no longer simply a soldier. He had no official title, no crown. And yet, when he walked through the halls of the High Palace, warriors bowed. Elders stood, because they remembered the man who had once revealed a weapon beneath his coat. Not a gun, not a blade of ego, but a weapon forged in patience, pain, and purpose. A weapon that had proved on the field and in the flame that size was never just about mass. It was about what you could carry. Zara took his hand as the ceremonial trumpets faded. "I'm told," she said, "that in your culture weapons are sometimes named." "They are." She nodded to the dagger he now wore at his side. "What would you call it?" Eric looked down at the weapon. He smiled. "Faith." Zara leaned in slightly. "And what do you call yourself, Eric of Earth?" He turned to her, eyes calm, voice steady. "A man who knows what it means to be underestimated." She laughed softly, the sound warm and unguarded. Then, as the twin suns crossed overhead and the Wreckfield shimmered in light, Zara of Draxor and Eric of Earth walked forward together, through peace, through war, through whatever came next. And the stars above watched as something ancient and rare unfolded between them. Not romance, not just alliance, but loyalty, fierce, undeniable, and as massive as the truth that once hid beneath a Terran soldier's waist, waiting for the right moment to be seen.